This is ANTIC, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of ANTIC, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Jason Scott is a digital historian and documentary filmmaker who for several years has worked for the Internet Archive, a nonprofit that has worked to save as much online and offline culture as possible. He is also known to attend the occasional Vintage Computer Festival, so as luck would have it, ANTIC and Jason were in the same festival at the same time, and we interviewed him on May 2nd, 2015 on stage at the Vintage Computer Festival Southeast 3.0.
All right, we've got Jason Scott here from the Internet Archive.
I have a really important question to start with. I know that your title is Free Range Archivist at the Internet Archive, right?
Yes.
So does that mean are you cage free? Are you vegetarian fed? How?
Sure. What's the humanity index on it? If there was inspectors to come in to look at me, would I have a combination of both an archiving pasture, or would I simply be kept in a pen?
Right. I mean, are you debeaked?
Is there a door nearby that I have the option of using, and that's considered to be free range? Yeah, no, the rules on free-range archivists are really kind of up in the air these days. They've really deregulated it beyond all the reasonable doubt. But on the other hand, archivists used to be hidden away, snapped into very specific job duties. And when I joined the Internet Archive in 2011, it was because I was known for collecting vintage computer material and had been doing so for years. And basically my boss, Brewster Kale, in our interview said, I just need you to be Jason Scott. But I need you to be Jason Scott for us, and you should collect things, you should bring attention to the work we do, and you should go out and gather things that we wouldn't think of gathering. And being that I come from a vintage computer background, I thought, okay, well then I'm going to grab as much in the way of digital data, PDFs of magazines, flyers, all sorts of material related to vintage computing that would fit in their walls, and not just, where they had been kind of going, which was kind of like ornithological treatises or yearbooks or old out-of-print materials that were related to like the 18th century. I wanted lots and lots of interesting, 1970s, 80s, 90s computer stuff. So that was my focus, free range. But I'll turn around and I'll do a hard drive full of sermons, or I'll talk to a filmmaker and get raw footage. So what's nice is that they've given me a lot of freedom, actual freedom.
Okay. So one question I had for you, Jason. You guys get a lot of submissions. Can you give us any idea what kind of, in terms of submissions related to vintage computers, how much of that is actually part of what you guys archive?
Sure. Going for a percentage would be an extremely unpleasant experience. The Internet Archive gets hundreds of uploads a day. There are different people who come in with all different agendas. And that's in an ideal world, the very nature of a library. We have a lot of Arabic language donations, and then we'll have a lot of educational, white papers, or people will use us to put up a video of a long play of a game, and what's nice is that we don't put the same restrictions on it that others might put. So we have like a whole range. Like people will upload books of their own, they'll upload anything from like, kind of restricted tar archives and everything else. I like to think though that due to the work I've done trying to make the archive aware in the vintage computing communities, that there's a whole bunch of materials that people now feel comfortable uploading to us that will have long-range appeal and should not just be hidden away. So for example, somebody has sent me 15 gigabytes of BIOS stuff. Kevin here does an amazing amount of uploading of newsletter or digital data from various sources for me. I'll also be sent CD-ROMs of various bits of things. So either directly through myself or inspiring people, we try to get gigabytes every month of computer relevant material. One of the nice bits is that we have an online book reader that's very effective for people getting right away from a PDF to a viewable document. And that's really inspired people to complete runs. So newsletters will be missing issue 6 and someone will go, oh, you don't have issue 6. I've got issue 6. And so we'll see people kind of backfill things. It can take like a 100-page PDF and treat it like it's no big deal. You see, so people will upload a PDF that normally would be a big pain for others, and we make it readable and downloadable. So people will upload to us, kind of out of print or out of use books, or they'll upload old manuals, and they'll feel that it's going to actually be accessible and relevant. So the problem is it's so hard to work out the numbers, because when you walk around the archive, you'll stumble into these bizarre piles of work. I mean, it's really, I think our current number, at a meeting about 2 weeks ago, through all of our various projects, we're acquiring roughly 15 terabytes of data a day, of which probably 7 or 8 terabytes is going to be user generated, and the rest of it's going to be automatic crawls and things like that. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to it's like standing in a water treatment plant and going, how many of this is sinks? It's like, I don't know. Look for toothbrushes that were thrown in. I don't know. So, but there's a lot of vintage computer stuff. Yeah.
So it sounds like maybe you have a network of people out there that you work with.
Say it again?
It sounds like maybe you have a network of people out there that you have helping to get some of this stuff uploaded. People like Kevin and others, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, what I like to do is, as one person, I'm really good at things like getting the word out or being an example. The number one problem with computer vintage material is people either have something and feel, well, surely somebody else has it, or they feel nobody wants or cares about this. Why should I make an effort to figure out who do I even talk to digitize or make this available? And by putting these items up, especially the obscure ones, we get a case where people just go, oh, I guess that has value, right? I've got more of that for that stone soup. And so people like Kevin help on the Atari side. I have some people who help on the Apple side. I have people who help just on general newsletters and talking to people. They'll do everything from buy things at eBay through to, visiting homes or being called into an estate because somebody has died, and they'll say, we'll take it, we'll do the right thing with it. Sometimes they have to send it to me directly. Sometimes it comes from a third location. And we end up with all this material going online because this group of people will make that little additional effort. I mean, I have a bunch of scripts that I do uploading, and I can make it very easy for myself. So you give me 100 PDFs, I can get them in there relatively easily. So if you've done that work to get it over to digital form, I'll help along, and I'll do the slight jump to do it into the Internet Archive's coffers in a way that makes sense. But I'm only, again, I'm only one person. I'm only ever going to be able to do X amount of work on any given day, and I'm only going to be able to ingest a certain amount. So without these other people, I would be, really digging away at a massive mountain with a spoon. I wouldn't have that ability. So I try to credit where possible. Some people are uncomfortable with credit. Some people want to be anonymous. Some people, they'll have worked for the company and they're a little uncomfortable having any link to them providing material for the company, even though it's been 25 years. But okay, you acknowledge people's needs and then you bring it in.
All right, so you mentioned me. I'm uploading Atari newsletters. You've got to have...
And bless you, by the way. Bless you in every way, because you do give me a lot of amazing stuff.
Thank you. Are you aware of other people who are just so into their little niche, their little box of things? Like, I'm only uploading Sonny Rollins jazz solos, or I'm only, can you give us examples of in other spaces or people who are just into their little niche babies that's all they focus on?
Sure. Jazz-wise, by the way, I did have a situation with a guy who he had a massive collection of 78s, and he decided to sell them for a sizable amount of money in his 60s. But before he did it, he transferred them all to cassettes. And in doing so, he gave little talks about what was on them with a historical value so that his children would be able to appreciate it. But his children didn't really overly appreciate it. So we had all these old cassettes. So there was another person, a younger person, who found out about this, and he digitized them. And they were being used by this school in Massachusetts. And it would be very interesting. The guy would walk through the whole career of a given drummer and say, oh, here he is in the background of this song. Here he is in the background of this song. Okay, here's his solo piece when he first started his own band. And it was amazing work, but it was all sitting in a hard drive in one school. And I offered to put it up on the archive. And it's called the David W. Niven Jazz Collection. And it's just an enormous amount of jazz off of 78s with this guy in a relative monotone talking about, oh, there was this thing with Sonny Rollins and he did this bit here and he did whatever, and then it plays. It's like the world's most somnambulistic jazz station, but it's amazing that he worked on it so hard. And they digitized all the labels, and so they're up. Then you might get somebody who...
I just want to say, being the most somnambulistic jazz station, that's really saying something.
It really is saying something. But it's got... if you heard it, you'd be like, wow, he was so... morning. And let's see, like people have transferred over, like there's something called the EPIC, which is it's the American clearing... It's basically, in the roughest of forms, America's FAQ. It's a division of the educational center which provides kind of hints, tips, information, and background in these cataloged writings. And they've been digitized over the years, and they're sitting in the government, and now the Internet Archive is getting copies of them. And so we're talking like mimeographed documents on how to clean stains from the 1960s, or car repair, or anything else. And it's like over 100,000 documents.
Wow.
So we've taken them, and we've put them up, and we've run indexing against them, and there they are, and it's just kind of sitting there. And it's way off there. Now, if you want something a little more frisky, I guess, we have the full run of the pole position comic cartoon. That's the cartoon version of the pole position game.
Sure.
The Saturday morning pole position cartoon, which was called Pole Position, and it's awful. I mean, it's awful. And we have some VHS rips of it, because they're kind of in limbo at best. Maybe one day they'll go away because somebody says, oh, no, we have a theme park dedicated to pole position. That's where we sell these, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So, really bizarre Atari ephemera is definitely...
Okay, well, that was getting into my next question. Our listeners being Atari users, we have talked on the podcast many times about the in-browser emulator and the newsletters that me and other people upload and such. But Jason, what have you done for us lately?
So, my big move right now, this particular year, is that I am absolutely moving towards just... The phrase that I am now using is agnostic ingestion. And that means that previously you would look at a pile and you would say, well, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff in here, but oh man, everyone's gonna dig this. And in some ways that's neat, and that's what you use when you're advocating, when you're saying, look everyone, if it's got this is a worthwhile thing. Like, oh, look at this Atari prototype document. Isn't that amazing? Doesn't that want you to look at more things? But I'm now to the point of saying, okay, let's just industrialize as much of the ingestion process as possible, and let me just go physically through all the stuff people have sent me and just grab it. And at the same time, versions of this exist everywhere, and unfortunately it's rather disparate, but guides and facts for pulling in massive amounts of information. So it's like, oh, you've got a scanner, and you've got documents. Here's some quick rules so you can add them to us. And I think that's going to be hopefully a sea change in terms of people out there saying, oh, I have this document. And it's important that you never let people double work. So you want to make it that it's easy to see of like, oh, you already have this, you already have this. I mean, we have a lot of manuals and we don't have a couple manuals. And I'd like to see kind of a canonical one and a list that lets you know, okay, this is all the 2600 manuals we have. Here's all the cartridge scans we have. And then stuff like, here are floppy disks that have not been imaged. Like, you only want people to image floppy disks that haven't been grabbed.
Right.
I mean,
it's easy to see what you have. It's not easy to know what you don't have.
Right. I mean, for instance, this recent one that I just got was a guy bought from a recycler 2,000 5.25-inch floppies. And he's going through them, and he's like, man, a lot of these are just files and digitization from bulletin board systems of the 1980s. So he just kind of pulled them all together as best as he could, kind of separated them by BBS they had been downloaded from, because for some reason he knew this, and he just made a 189 meg RAR file that was like, my count is something like 7,940 individual zip files, each one representing a program from anywhere from 1982 to about 1992 for the PC. And thanks to all these other things I've written, it's been relatively easy to automatically pull them in, ingest them, screenshot them, make them playable. And there's programs in there that I'm sure have not seen the light of day in over 25 years and are interesting. I mean, you wouldn't mount a search party for some of these, but if you found them and they were there and provided for you and their relatively grabbed metadata gave you a hint as to what they are, you could use that in research and be pretty happy about it or discover something you didn't know. Now that we're working in the Atari area, I'm very, very much into user group disks because those are the ones, like, we've kind of captured Preppy, and we've done a really excellent job with Star Raiders, but we're not doing so good with, whatever, the Sacramento Atari Group's financial disk, where they put like 9 different financial programs on it with a custom menu, and making that playable and enjoyable and usable. And that's where I think I'm really starting, I'm more worried about that someone has a pile of those in their office and they're like, well, it's impossible to transfer these and who would care? And I'm like, it's not impossible to transfer and we care. And as a result, like even now in the Atari sections on the Internet Archive, there's some really interesting art and some really interesting screenshots and writing that I think just kind of fell into obscurity. Like if you were a fan, you might have some of these in your collection. But to be able to kind of skim through and be like, whoa, that's a weird image of Saddam Hussein. Whoa, look at that drawing. Whoa, look at that space image. That's crazy. Right. I think there's something massive value there.
X-rated images of the Smurfs.
Well, yeah. There's the best part about the whole situation is how everything comes to light. So the disc that people would know to kind of set aside just ends up showing up like, hey guys, did you need the cartoon porn? Did anyone call for cartoon porn? And then you're like, oh, and so I made a mature section. I had to, because of course, like moths to a flame.
More like the immature section.
Well, the problem is that they would, like the way our system worked, the new system, the new visual system works, is if you click on something, that's an indication it's of interest to people. And so porn rises to the top, like what you hope is cream. And so you end up with these things kind of shooting up the popular list until finally the pornography or just maturity or even immature or profane or whatever just kind of rises up. And that's a shame because there's more to it than that, but the eye gets caught. Right. So we're really against censorship. We really don't want it that we're going to be like, well, humanity shouldn't have the Smurf porn. So we make a little Smurf porn village and we put it there and let it sit there. And if people want to go there and they look at it, it's like, okay, now you know what's there. I mean, I do agree that people shouldn't go in looking for the bouncy ball game with their kid and stumble upon weird movies or profanity from the 90s from some demo group or anything else like that. But I also think that that's such a minor percentage. It's not as bad as I'd hoped.
So I guess I'm not clear how you would identify those. How do you identify those things that you want to put into a different section like that? Do you have filters that look for specific keywords or specific?
So basically, unfortunately, it's not as easy to extract metadata.
Yeah.
You end up with a disk image, right? Let's say you have a disk image, and that's been transferred by somebody magnetically, and depending on what the disk image is, like if it's an Atari image or an Apple image, it's possible to pull out the individual files and look at them. With other ones, I don't know how, it will be possible, it's just not being done right now. You can do certain tests. So one of the magic things about the Internet Archive is that we made a bet a long time ago, and the bet is machines working bluntly will do a job considerably okay to bored hired teenagers. Not perfect, but if you're 17 and you have to look through 4,000 floppies, your metadata skills or interest will probably be on par with these scripts. You'll go, oh, it mentioned a microwave, it's a diskette, it's an Atari, and okay, you're not going to go shooting into like research to go, well, tell me more about the Interplay company. You're going to just basically do what it takes. And so the Internet Archive does an amazing battery of tests on, for example, video. It looks at the video, it tries to determine if it's color or black or white, it tries to determine the aspect ratio, the running length, the codec. If it can find anything in the ID3 tags, if it's an MP3, it'll try to find those. It tries to look for other header images. It just kind of like flips it over, pokes at it with a stick and comes up with it. Does the same thing for books. And with software, it's a little more fragmented because there's so many different types. But for instance, I wrote a program that would go through the zip file for IBM disks, look for anything with a star.doc or star.text name, push through it, try to find the most frequent words, and kind of generate a word meta cloud. Sometimes it is wonderful, sometimes it is awful. Same thing with manuals, do a word cloud against them, produce, all sorts of it'll say black, white, gambit, chess, Kasparov, winner, loser. And from that you can sort of summarize, it's a chess program. Whereas other times it'll say ob, ib, an, the, and you'll be like, that tells me nothing. And with disks, you kind of, we have a script right now that does an attempt at pulling out a directory. Kevin helped write that, and by helped write it, I mean Kevin wrote that. And then you have things that kind of extract data out of it and try to come up with word clouds and everything else. And it'll either do a good job or it won't do any job, but it tried. Similarly, it will pull by emulation the images. So you can tell very quickly as a person when you look at the screenshot to go, chess program. And it will boot it up and it will take a bunch of screenshots like for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And then it will start pressing a few random keys to see if something livens up. And then it looks at all the screenshots, gets rid of the doubled ones, and then from that produces an animated GIF, so you can kind of see it in the screenshot preview, and it does a pretty good job. I think it's very nice how it's produced. Right now it does JPEGs, it probably should do PNGs, there's little tweaks here and there that I should do. But I've been very happy with the fact that we have integrated close to 30,000 programs, which would have been somebody's career. And it's been able to kind of just do it on the side over the course of a few months. And in fact, I wrote an Amazon instance version. So should we get flooded with 10,000 of them, I can just open up 5 instances, let them run through free, and we'll end up with a screenshot set very quickly. So, It's not an exact science. I always try to maintain the original archives untouched. So, for instance, when the guy gave me those floppy disks, he gave me a 100 and some odd RAR. Like I said, well, I made sure that RAR is always available. I don't remove it to give you my special boutique version. If somebody comes in and says, "Okay, yeah, fine, you ham-fistedly ran roughshod over this thing, you idiot. Can I just have what was there?" You point them to the original file, they download it, they do their own special things. Because maybe in another 5 years, some kid's going to write some engine that's going to put me to shame, that the thing will actually play the game and say, "This is a shooter, and this is how you win." Where it's not out of the realm of reality to think that we will eventually have AI of some sort that plays the games and determines things about the game playing it. So, always keep an eye to the future. Don't think that you are the logical end.
So the archive has done a ton for the Atari community and for the world at large. What can the average Atari user listening to the show do to help improve the holdings, we'll say the Atari holdings at the archive? Can you go in there? I know it's easy to add reviews. Does that help, or is there a way to add metadata?
So the number one thing a person who is an Atari listener and an Atari fan is to look through their own Atari collections to see if there are handwritten things that were passed to them, to see if there were documents or writings that they have that they feel like maybe not even, forget commercial ones, slick commercial ones, but if they have old newsletters, writings, lists, printouts from bulletin board systems would be precious, printouts from forums would be precious, saves that they did of websites in the 90s, really like things that they personally collected that are not just something they went to a store and bought would be precious to have, and to then alert various authorities, i.e. yourself, myself, other people, hey, I have all this. That would be an amazing step. Going forward on the archive, we have this new version of the interface. It's called V2. And we're currently implementing something that is internally called the squeeze. And the squeeze is a move towards V2 from V1. Right now, the majority of users are now put into V2. And we're refining that thing, because of course people are like, new scary thing. Once we have made people as comfortable as they can possibly be in the new interface, we will then turn on features involving crowdsourced metadata and collection. Once that starts, then you will start to see things like curated collections, like you will have like the canonical Synapse software collection or the canonical Atari computer collection, and it will span all media types. Media types will fade as we won't just have a collection of movies or a collection of books. It will be a collection of movies, books, films, audio, and software as needed. Like we have figured out in the many long bets of the archive that the future cannot possibly include closed, one-by-one manufacturing and proprietary interaction with the stuff, where one person is the grand poobah, and he gifts one or two people who are social enough and chummy enough to have gotten his attention, and then they're able to edit it. We want it that there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, and then people are making changes, and then ultimately, while I have skepticism about the whole Wikification of things.
I was about to say, you're not a fan of Wikipedia, but it sounds like a lot like Wikipedia.
So there's two advantages to what we have over what Wikipedia does. First of all, it's based around objects, and so the objects are immutable. Like we have a floppy disk. Now, how people...
Some jerk isn't going to come in and go, this game's not important, and pull it away, and then it's gone.
Right, you're not fighting.
With a Wikipedia
you're not fighting
article.
to keep the status quo. You don't have to revitalize and justify obscure cultural items every year or 6 months, or have two people vote that it should go away, and the third person say, I agree. There will always be the immutable objects, and there will always be bad actors, but I think that it will be a case of people can contribute and do changes And then over time, we'll have levels of that. I think it's going to be a growing process, which is why my group, my library is working so hard to have kind of the user interface bugs kind of worked out as far as they're going to get before we open up this next phase. But I think that's the only future you can have, is people who love Atari being in the Atari section, people who love vintage computers going into the general computing and kind of drawing parallels of going, oh my God, even though you have this obscure Burroughs document, it covers something, and that engineer then linked and went to, see also, that engineer then went to Atari and designed this interface. Look at that. Like, nobody would otherwise draw that connection. So I think that's the future. I mean, it's the only future we can really see.
Send a message to the Atari community before we close out.
Atari community, I have been a member of you since I was 11 years old. I was somebody who used the Atari 2600. I used the Atari 5200, the 7800, Atari 800. I lived the life of the Atari logo, of the Fuji logo. I have always been a fan. I've had an Atari 800 since I was in my early teens. I mean, it's always been one of my favorite aesthetics. The beige case really worked for me. The artwork, the logos, and all of the promise. And I mean, I always have a special place I put that all. So I love you guys.
This quick question.
Sure.
So, have you seen the information from the ESA, and they're wanting to crack down on the copyright, all the archive software and emulation and all that stuff? And what are your thoughts in regards to how that's going to affect the archive?
I'm aware of it because it's part of a Library of Congress action that I am in fact testifying in. So the ESA. Okay, so here's the roughest form of what's going on. Every 3 years, the Library of Congress opens up a set of hearings, and in it, people devise or request exemptions to the copyright law for various reasons. And honestly, it can be any reason, but it almost always settles down into research or maintenance or the ability to maintain something, and having copyright's overarching aspects not distinguish that. I mean, a classic example, which I have given elsewhere at this convention, is heart or health software that is part of some piece of equipment, and then that company goes out of business, and in technical terms, you're not really able to then reverse engineer that software to keep that liver pump going or keep that piece of equipment going. Well, an exemption would say, okay, well, if it's obviously not for sale and the company is no longer in business, you may reverse engineer it and produce an aftermarket part for it, even though technically you were not supposed to have been able to work on it for another 100 years. And so every 3 years there's some dance, and groups come forward and say, we want this exempted. And there are a number of industry groups whose 100% job is to show up and say, no. No, 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 no. Not 1 inch, not 1 millimeter. We will continue to only decide ourselves when other things can be worked on. One of those, the one that I'm involved in, involves the reverse engineering of the network faculties of entertainment software in which the servers have no longer stayed online. So, for instance, EverQuest or City of Heroes, or to be honest, another 50 others that I could mention that have all gone under, and people have all of this historical client information, and there's no server to hook up to it. And so in theory, if a researcher watched what came out of the client, reverse engineered what it did, and tried to put it up, in theory, they are violating some sort of copyright, although one could argue fair use. But here they're trying to get a specific, complete exemption.
On the Atari side of thing, the games computers play service from the 80s, this people still have the client software and the servers are
Right.
gone. And we actually have the tacit approval of those guys. But if we didn't, it would be illegal right now to try to
And
reverse engineer it.
You have the tacit approval, but that's only because of the existence of one or two people. And in theory, you know, why do they even get to tell you that? Because it doesn't work, right? And
Right.
you're going to
They're not losing any money if we set
Right.
up our new
You're not going to
server.
provide some sort of new service that utilizes their thing in the same way. I mean, not realistically. And so that's the exemption I'm fighting for, one should say. I'm testifying as part of 103. A beautiful salvo occurred where, now, so there's like a bunch of these, and what's weird is their stories filter down through the tech press because they're interesting, but they usually are very coarse and not very well written articles. So for instance, one of them is about that it is not a copyright violation to break or reverse engineer software for the purposes of being a professional security researcher. So if you're somebody who's like, I want to figure out what shoots out of an Android phone to figure out if there are any back doors, in theory, they could say, well, you're violating our copyright. You are reverse engineering us. And that puts people at danger. If you threaten professionals with 10 years in jail, unless you've given the tacit approval, then the most insecure, most paranoid companies will simply lock them down, and nobody will have them. And then suddenly they discover, as they've discovered recently, cable boxes that have single password back doors, or that shoot out and offer a server that nobody should have access to. And so that's one of the actions out there. Somehow in all of that, the ESA showed up and said basically, yeah, this is a dumb idea. This is not valid. Nobody should do this. Game servers are game servers. Everything is fine. Stop looking here. And the EFF fired out this amazing press salvo that basically punched the ESA in the face. Like basically just hit them with a chair during the press conference before the hearing even begins for another month plus. And the soundbite that the news community came out with is, ESA says museums are pirates. And you just ended up with this ridiculous, and ESA is like, what? We did, but they suddenly realized this wasn't just going to be some pushover. Like, I think the ESA has now realized, oh, we can't just sit in this room and say no. I think that room, which is located in Los Angeles, UCLA actually, is going to be filled with copyright and activist tourists who are going to be part of it to witness this sausage being made, to sign petitions or to say anything else. And I'm tacitly part of it in some way. I've already submitted my testimony, and I may be, assuming that I am called, I will be cross-examined. You know, because as part of the Internet Archive, in case you're wondering, among the things we have to reverse engineer will be game console stuff that, you know, at the moment we're not particularly kneecapped by it, but as time goes on, you know, we're going to find that anything that used a network, whether it's a Dreamcast or an Xbox or anything else, is suddenly not going to be able to work. And it would be nice to have the exemption, so I'd like us to have the exemption. It's not really stopping the research on it, but, you know, I believe that's a reasonable, valid exemption. I believe in abandonware, which is not, of course, a concept that's compatible with things either, but one fight at a time. Let's at least make, you know, EverQuest at least functioning enough to know what's going on. So that's what's going on with that. It's boring and weird to be part of a law process, and a lot of people didn't even really know. I mean, 3 years is most of someone's high school or most of someone's college. So the chance and the opportunity to really get up the momentum to be part of it is kind of cut down by that. You know, I mean, if the last time this happened was 2012 and the next time it's going to happen is 2018, I mean, that's a real way to slow things down. So it's going to be interesting. You know, at one point, the Internet Archive got an exemption to undo copy protection for old games, to be able to duplicate them, to be able to provide them. Might happen again. Very Atari answer, how's that?
Atari.
Much like Atari did with Atari. Atari. Man, 40 minutes of that would be great, wouldn't it? Atari. Apple. Atari.
Thank you, Jason, for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Thank you. We appreciate everything you do, Jason.
No, thank
Thanks.
you very much, and I appreciate listening to you guys.
Rev up for excitement with the pole position team. Today's adventure, the Cove.
Which button do I press?
Press them all! You have 5 seconds.